I'm here because I am a roaring lion crying out, righteousness. I want to introduce you to one of the world's most prolific writers in the person of Joseph Mitchell. And the reason why this is so important, I want all our students and I want every member and every well-wisher to listen to this. I'll call for in just a moment. That because it was through Joseph Mitchell that the good Sister Charlene Humphrey has become the recipient of a large number of things that she's now giving to us out of his wealth. And also at some point in time, I'll be talking about Sister Charlene Humphrey and her father, who at one point had the world's largest antique. There was the world's largest antique dealer. I'll talk about that, but not today. But a large number of things that she is the recipient of came from the wealth and the home of Joseph Mitchell. Joseph Mitchell, of course, was raised up in the same county. We were both born 18 miles from one another, where I was born and where he was born. He may have walked barefoot as well among the tobacco fields, cotton fields there in Fairmount growing up. But he left Fairmount after graduating Chapel Hill College and came to New York. And the thing you're going to find very fascinating about this is that Joseph Mitchell, who is this Japhet, now this white man, who this tremendous author who wrote for the New Yorker magazine and amassed a lot of wealth. And many of the things that we're receiving now here at the ATLAH Church, the truckloads of things, many of the chairs were chairs that he sat in or his family sat in. And they're heirlooms of his lifestyle there in Fairmount, North Carolina. This is so fascinating. And we just thank God for Sister Charlene Humphrey for being able to turn this pipeline onto us. Joseph Mitchell he's dead now. He died, I think, in 1996. But there was a symposium held honoring him, and three great scholars are going to talk about him. So I want you to listen to this, and then we're going to have our students and everybody else take a different look at the things that we're receiving. But I'm going to let the video play, and I'm going to let you hear at least so you can get a sense of who Joseph Mitchell was, and then see the similarities between him and the Barefoot Prophet, and between me and Joseph Mitchell as well. This is so fascinating. Mr. Engineer, run that clip, please.
Good evening. I am Ken Jackson. I have been teaching history at Columbia for decades. And among other things, I'm head of the Herbert Lehman Center for the Study of American History. At a great city and a great university, there are literally dozens of talks and conferences every day. But this one is special, in part because Joseph Mitchell was special, and that's why so many people are interested in it, and because we have a special group of speakers tonight. I want to acknowledge the support of the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia, of the Herbert Lehman Center for American History, and of the University Seminar on the City and the University Seminars in general at Columbia, but mostly to acknowledge the hard work of Professor Lisa Keller, who is the Associate Director, and this was her idea, and she's done all the hard legwork to make it happen, and she's going to introduce the program. So would Professor Keller come up, and let's give her a thanks.
Thank you. Well, it is my pleasure to be here, and it was a very special event to organize because I am the daughter of a journalist, and I was a former journalist myself in Greece, and I'm also a historian. So it is my pleasure also as Associate Director of the Lehman Center and Chair of the Seminar in the City to have this wonderful trio with us today. It started out with a simple phone call to Tom Kunkel. I saw your new biography, and then one thing led to the other, and he said, this guy called me, and we had this great conversation. I said, really? He said, yeah, Gay Talese. I said, oh, maybe he would come and we could have a conversation. And then I said, I'm sure Steve Call is going to be interested. I know him. I'll call him and we'll get him. And these three wonderful gentlemen agreed to do this evening. So you never know what can come out of a casual conversation. So let me introduce my three speakers, all of whom are extraordinary men in the world of writing, journalism, and everything else. Tom Kunkel, whose book, by the way, we have all the books of these three authors, which will be sold, and they would be thrilled to sign them after the event, and I think you all want their signatures. Tom Kunkel is in his 8th year as president of St. Norbert College in De Pere, Wisconsin, outside Green Bay. He's the author or editor of 6 books, including the featured book tonight, Man in Profile, Joseph Mitchell of The New Yorker. Prior to going to St. Norbert, Kunkel was dean of the Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland and served as president of the American Journalism Review. His previous books include Genius in Disguise, a biography of New Yorker founding editor Harold Ross, and a New York Times notable book, Enormous Prayers, A Journey into the Priesthood, and in 2000, Letters from the Editor, an analysis of Harold Ross's letters, and that was another New York Times notable books. As a journalist, Tom worked for the Miami Herald, the New York Times, San Jose Mercury News, and many other publications, and at the age of 29 became the youngest top editor in Knight Ridder newspapers, when we had newspapers. Gay Talese was a figure from my childhood, I should say, when my father said, if you want to learn about journalism, read Gay Talese. And I did, and I was just chatting with him before saying, I read your material in Esquire when I was a really young kid, and it was really impressive, and I said, that's what my father told me to read. Born in Ocean City, New Jersey, he was a newspaper man from the start, working as a schoolboy correspondent for his town weekly. He attended the University of Alabama and worked for the Birmingham Post-Herald, which was a Scripps Howard daily, and he joined the New York Times after graduation in 1953 as a copy boy. After 2 years in the Army as a tank officer, he rejoined the Times as sports feature writer. In 1958, he joined the Times news staff and wrote 30 pieces for Time magazine, and then left in 1965 for Esquire, where I began to read his things in 1965. He wrote pieces on Sinatra, DiMaggio, Clifton Daniel, and then, of course, led to this blockbuster book, The Kingdom and the Power, Honor Thy Father, Thy Neighbor's Wife, and Unto the Sons. He's married to Nan Talese, who is joining us this evening, who has her own notable imprint at Random House, and they have 2 daughters, Pamela, a sometimes visitor at my city seminar, and Catherine. He's currently on assignment with The New Yorker for a piece to be published entitled A Nonfiction Marriage, based on his own half-century marriage. Steve Call, who is the head of the dean of the Columbia Journalism School, is a staff writer at The New Yorker and an illustrious author of 7 books of nonfiction and 2-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize. He was a reporter, foreign correspondent, and senior editor at the Washington Post from 1985 to 2005. And he was the Post's first international investigative correspondent based in London. He served as managing editor of the Post between 1998 and 2004, and then joined The New Yorker, where he wrote on international politics, American politics, and national security, intelligence, and media. His prize-winning books include Ghost Wars, The Secret History of the CIA, Afghanistan and Bin Laden, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning The Bin Ladens, An Arabian Family in the American Century. His most recent book, Private Empire, ExxonMobil and American Power, is also a prize-winning book, and he won a Pulitzer for reporting on the Securities and Exchange Commission. Our 3 distinguished guests are going to have a conversation about Joseph Mitchell, who is the icon for New York history, and we will, at the end of that, open the floor for questions and comments. Keep them short, please, directed at our special guests. This will be followed by a reception and the book signing. We welcome our 3 guests and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you, Ken, and thank you, Lisa, very much for organizing this. What an honor to be here with Gay, and I also want to acknowledge Bud Trillin, who's sitting up front, who we're going to pick on later to join the conversation, a friend of Joseph Mitchell's, as well as one of the great writers of his generation. Let's get right into it. I think what brings us here is this life and the body of work that so many of us have been influenced by over the years in journalism. And I think we'll start talking a little bit about Joseph Mitchell in the city of New York, and then I hope we'll talk a little bit about journalism as well, because as we'll hear, Joseph Mitchell influenced Gay Talese and other great sources of inspiration and innovation in the 1960s, and yet Tom Kunkel's biography brings us back to some basic questions about technique that we want to chew on in a serious way, I think, tonight. Tom, let's start with the biography. Like a lot of great writers, he had unlikely origins in rural North Carolina, came to the big city, was a beat reporter at the New York Herald Tribune, assigned to Harlem on his first beat, an amazing place to begin if you're coming from Tobacco Road. And he walks the streets of New York and he develops this great engagement with the city that shapes his life and his work. You probably have spent more time with his unfinished work about New York than any of the rest of us, because he struggled with a big opus toward the end of his life. What was New York to him? I mean, he was nostalgic about it, he was possessive of it, he was passionate about it, but what was the city in his mind's eye?
Well, I think when he got here, and for much of his life, New York was paradise for Joe Mitchell. And I don't mean to sound naive, and he was certainly anything but naive. It had a lot of problems and it had a lot of issues, but you talked about his origins. I say somewhere in the book, he was born in Fairmont, North Carolina, and for those of you who've never been to Fairmont, North Carolina, which we could have a show of hands, but I think probably most of you have not. I say think Mayberry, if Mayberry had African former slaves and Native Americans and tobacco and things like that. But it was that small town, North Carolina. That's where Joe grew up, and he did go to Chapel Hill for college, but then he immediately came to New York City. And imagine going, the shock to the system and the impact to the senses, and certainly to somebody who was, had the sensory capability, the astonishing observational powers of Joe Mitchell. And he was dazzled. You're right. I mean, one of the first assignments he had was in Harlem, and he just soaked it up. And when he got off his night shift, he would still troll the place and the bars and the dives and the street front churches. And
what kind of a reporter was he? Because he was a walker in a very profound way.
Well, ironically, Stanley Walker, the legendary city editor, his first real city editor, had told him, whatever you do, walk the city, don't. He said, a bus is okay, you can see things in a bus, but if you really want to learn the city, you need to walk it. And, I don't know, again, no way of knowing, but it's hard to imagine anybody probably ever walked as much the length and breadth of New York City. And I don't just mean Manhattan, but I mean all the boroughs as Joseph Mitchell. He got to know them all like the back of his hand, and he saw and he absorbed everything. And everything was interesting to him. And that's one of the reasons I think he's such a remarkable writer, because everything interested him. The things he wrote about were unlike anything else that anyone else was writing about New York, certainly at that time.
List some of his subjects for those who may not be saturated in his...
Well, in the early days, when Joe first... so he wrote for about 10 years. He sort of did a 10-year apprenticeship with the New York newspapers. Originally the Herald Tribune, then the World Telegram, where he became so well known for his feature stories that he was one of the people he was on billboards as the delivery trucks went around town. So he really had developed something of a following as a newspaper writer. And then he crossed over. He started contributing to the New Yorker. He came to New York in 29. He started contributing to the New Yorker in 33. And in 1938, he started working full-time for the New Yorker. And some of his earliest stories for the New Yorker were pieces like one of my favorites was a piece about what was called a beefsteak, kind of one of the vestiges of the Tammany Hall age, where for special occasions people would get dressed up in tuxedos and evening gowns and go and just have this incredibly gluttonous event where literally steaks would come out on platters, and lamb chops and kidneys, and there were no utensils. You ate them with your hands, and you drank beer, and there were oompa bands playing, and I mean, the story. I mean, you can almost smell the steak on the grill. I mean, it's so wonderful. And he wrote about Lady Olga, the sideshow performer, the bearded lady. He wrote about Maisie, the hard-bitten theater owner in the Bowery with the heart of gold. He wrote about characters that people would see on the streets, but no one really was writing about, and certainly no one in the New Yorker had been writing about them until Joe came along.
So, Gay, when did you first read Joseph Mitchell?
All right, I'll time this. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that amazing? Joseph Mitchell. And first of all, many of you may not know the length and breadth of all the things that Sister Charlene Humphrey has sent to us. Many of them from his accumulation. Her son, Humphrey's son, is now occupying the office building that was there in Fairmount, North Carolina. But the fact that his first beat was here in Harlem. This is Japheth man, right? Raised up in Fairmount, North Carolina, same place, 18 miles from where I was raised up. And when he comes to New York, he gets assigned to Harlem. And he walks the streets of Harlem like the barefoot prophet, like I've walked the streets of Harlem. I mean, don't you find that fascinating? And he's become this prolific writer, just so well respected. And of course, this is being held at Columbia University School of Journalism. Over at Columbia is where this meeting took place. And these scholars and Pulitzer Prize writers discussing the life and times of Joseph Miller and his character, who he was, growing up in rural North Carolina. I mean, we were certainly separated by a large number of years, where his birth and my birth. At least we have the same initials: J for Joseph, J for James, M for Manning, M for Mitchell, right? What do y'all, ATLAH and the world, what do you think about this? And the conduit of this, the person that's brought all this together is Charlene Humphrey, who herself is the wife of a late pastor, the Reverend Dr. Lewis Earl Humphrey. What do y'all think about this? I mean, it would be one thing if someone gave us a great gift. We'd appreciate it, right? And the similar, but to be so connected to me, connected to North Carolina, connected to where I was born, connected to my barefootedness. Okay, that would be something too. But then Joseph Mitchell, a Japheth man, comes and walks the streets of Harlem and visits the churches of Harlem. I guarantee you he's been in this church. You know why he would have come to this church? Because of Father Divine. Joseph Mitchell would have come and sat in this church to study Father Divine. And I'm going to ask those scholars, I'm going to put together a group of us people to research. Did Joseph Miller write anything about Father Divine? Did he write anything up? Because he knew these men. He knew Father Divine. He knew Marcus Garvey. I'm almost certain that Joseph Mitchell has been in this building, has worshiped in this building. And now a lot of these furnishings and things that are coming from Sister Humphrey were in his possession. We've got a sliding doors that he made with his own hands. She gave them to us. I've tried to contact the New Yorker, Columbia Magazine, Columbia University. He made these doors with his own, the glass side sliding doors of the house where he lived. They were made several years ago. But all the things that we have, many of them, I'm going to go back to Columbia University School of Journalism, to the New Yorker Magazine. I'm going to put together a group of people because this man's life is so vast. I know he was in this building. I know it. Don't you just feel it? That Joseph, now all of his possessions are coming to this building. What do you think about that? Elder Butler, what do you think about that? Elder Paul McFarquhar, what do you think about that? That this is happening? Or do you think it's just a dream and we're going to all wake up and discover we don't have any of these prized possessions and none of this is really true? And I was raised up in North Carolina, son of a sharecropper, walking barefoot, poor as dirt. And that's just all it was to it. No Japheth man came and walked the streets of Harlem from the same place I came and walked barefoot. We both walked barefoot in the same county in North Carolina. Then we both came and walked the streets of Harlem. That didn't happen. What do y'all think about this? I mean, how do you interpret all of this? And of course, there's a lot more to be said. I just thought that I wanted to be able to get those initial things out about Joseph Mitchell, so that you can get a sense now of where these things are coming from. And I'll talk more about Charlene Humphrey as well, and she and her father. I'll get to that. But for the umpteenth time now, why do you think this is happening? I mean, since the beginning of this year, from a barefoot prophet to Sister Charlene Humphrey, Joseph Mitchell, all of this is just unfolding about Harlem. What do you think of this? I mean, what do you think is going on? What do you think God is doing? What do you think? Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful. Help us to understand the magnitude of the blessings that you're sending into our lives. Help us, Almighty God, and let us lift up our hands towards Fairmount, North Carolina, for Sister Charlene Humphrey. Sister Charlene Humphrey yet lives in Fairmount with a heart of gold and blessings, and has brought not just the gifts. We're so thankful to have all the gifts and antiques, the priceless items. But she's also brought us the history of a man whose life is like my life here in Harlem. I'm sure he loved Harlem. I'm sure he was in our church. Help us, Jesus, to interpret this. Help us to spread the word that walking barefoot and walking the streets of Harlem. Help us to understand how critical that you have put this together. No man could have done this on his own. Help us. Help me understand it. I mean, I just never thought about being as blessed as I do. I'm grateful to the Lord to be able to eat a piece of bread, have a piece of meat, get up the next day and preach, have a reasonable portion of health and my strength, be able to put both feet on the floor, dress myself. I'm good to go. I'm reasonably thankful with that. But to have all of this coming at us at one time, I just never expected a blessing like this. I just never expected a blessing like this. Help us. Help me. Help us. And thank God for the life and times of Joseph Mitchell and any of his family members that are yet alive. Thank God for Fairmount, North Carolina. Thank God for Red Springs, North Carolina. Thank God. Thank you, Jesus.
I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. I shall not be moved. shall not be moved. When my burden's heavy, I shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the waters, I shall not be moved. When I need your guidance, I shall turn to you. Lord, when I need your guidance, I shall turn to you. Just like a tree that's planted by the waters, oh, I shall not be moved. Lord, when I need your power, I shall turn to you. Lord, when I need your power, I shall turn to you. Just like a tree that's planted by the waters, I shall not be moved. Lord, when I need your healing, I shall turn to you. Lord, when I need your healing, I shall turn to you. Just like a tree that's planted by the waters, oh, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. Lord, I shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the water,